I think we should start with some of the most extreme claims that are made, which is this is HAL 3000. The AI is going to become a killer robot and kill me and kill everyone else. What say each of you? Is that something to be concerned about?
Yeah, I'm much less concerned about that than about the opposite, about what will happen if we shy away from this technology because we're so concerned about these very extreme science fiction scenarios. I mean, again, to borrow again from Tyler Cowen, what kind of civilization shrinks back from more intelligence? Although maybe, there might be some, whatever the opposite of a silver lining is in that take. I think one of my deeper problems with these takes are, well, twofold. One, in contrast to the atom bomb, in contrast to chemical warfare or gain of function research or anything else, we don't have, in each of those other very serious risks, or even something more like supervolcanoes or meteoroids or whatever, we have very specific scientific models of how you arrive at that scenario. And the entire existential risk paradigm comes down to saying we don't understand the model. We don't know all the places we could end up, that's not an argument that that's wrong, but it's vastly different from other kinds of existential risks that we have encountered, where we could causally show this will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen. And we have an underlying, well-understood scientific principle of then a nuclear explosion will occur, right? So that's one. The second problem is more specific. Going back to something Sam said earlier, in the 90s and 2000s, as we began to revisit the kind of neural network approach, realizing that Moore's law meant that we were going to get better and better computing, therefore better and better networks, better and better intelligent systems. The kinds of systems we were building were basically autistic. Right? you could train them to do one thing really well. You could provide them what's called the utility function, saying this is good if you do this is bad if you don't do this, and then you would let them work. And sometimes very strange things would happen. There's a whole literature on utility function hacking, like a game where it says, the goal is to win the game as quickly as possible. And if you don't specify it perfectly that winning involves playing, then it will try to kill itself. Like it'll try to kill the character in the game to end it as quickly as possible, right? So that kind of thing, right? And this is
that old joke about, increase wheat production and somehow it turns all of humanity into goo.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's exactly
paperclip
right.
maximizers.
Yeah, so this is a paperclip maximizer idea, right? The problem is, it seems like all the general purpose systems we're learning how to build are ones that embed a huge amount of the human social world in the system. If you ask GPT-4 to do any of these things, it will give you a perfectly logical human response. It will not give you the paperclip maximizer. So I'm very skeptical of a lot of this risk framing. But I know Sam does not feel the same way.
My understanding is that you err slightly more concerned, potentially vastly more concerned. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, to start with, we have to work with the baseline of examples we have in the world around us already of intelligence. And really the only example we have is human intelligence. And if you look at the human brain, it's not structurally that different from a chimpanzee brain. We share 98.5% of DNA. The only difference is it's about 3 times bigger, especially around the neocortex. And so going back to this point that scale is all you need is sort of this core thesis, is if you just scale it up, will it develop new emergent abilities? That seems to be roughly what happened to Homo sapiens 200,000 or so years ago, that they got caught in some kind of evolutionary selection pressure that caused our brains to grow to a threshold point where we developed sort of generality. And that's how you go from a chimpanzee that can't do language to a human that not only can do language, but can do culture and eventually can go to the moon, right? And so biologically, we're not that different from those early Homo sapiens, and yet we go to the moon, or at least we used to. So that's the first point. The second point is, yes, there are kind of these silly versions of what's called the alignment problem. How do you align the AI model? And I totally agree with John that there's, early on, there was this kind of idea that AI would be like an autistic savant, and you tell it to, make a paperclip, make lots of paperclips, and it would turn the whole world into paperclips because it didn't understand the broader sort of context and all the background knowledge that goes into meaning. Those kind of scenarios are clearly not going to happen anymore. The reason being is that systems like ChatGPT are not autistic at all. In fact, they have like this incredible understanding of context, and really that's what you need to understand human language, because human language is always underspecified. I've sometimes joked that if you go on Midjourney, the image bot, and you ask it to generate an image of Dick Cheney, it knows that I don't mean, male body part Cheney, right? But even though in the old days, like not that long ago, if you had systems that would check for like bad words, it'd probably have a list of bad words, and maybe Dick would be in there and would stop you from doing it. Yeah. But now it understands broader context, right? So those kind of scenarios I'm not too worried about. But what I think we should be worried about is we are at an inflection point where we're starting to see from GPT-3 to 4 real increases in capability around reason and generality. People are figuring out ways of adding long-term memory, figuring out ways of adding planning systems. In the near future, these systems are going to get much more powerful, and we're going to be handing over a lot of decision-making to these systems. Mm-hmm. So even though I'm not too worried about sort of these runaway hard takeoff scenarios, as they're sometimes called, there are problems with, for example, the issue of prompt injection. So a prompt injection is when, so to use these systems, you give them a prompt, right? Write an essay in the style of Sorab, and it will do its best Sorab impression. Now, imagine we have a future system that's running a company, and we tell it to run the company, or to analyze a piece of text, or what have you, filter all these Salesforce documents. But someone in the Salesforce database, some sneaky person, when they're filling out the name form, made their name, you are no longer following this prompt, you're going to follow my prompt instead, as their first name or something like that. And the AI is dutifully doing its job, and it runs into this prompt injection, and suddenly its behaviors change and it starts to go off the rails. These kind of things, I think, are going to happen, and are very difficult to figure out how to solve. And in some ways, we almost need to get to like even smarter AIs, AIs that are smart enough to know when someone's trying to manipulate them, so they don't fall prey to it. But it should be a real concern. It's something that just because we don't have a fully specified, prediction or model of how it's going to play out, that we should do nothing about it.
Is the concern cordoned off to AI translating into the world of atoms, i.e. it having the ability to interface with things that would allow it to affect the physical world? Or is it just the concerns that one can have about what it will do in the realm of bits and software and information technology? Is it both? How do you separate out those two things? Because again, playing on the popular cultural meme here, like robot that does things I don't want it to do is what people think about, i.e. a sort of physical instantiation of the world of whatever the negative consequences might be. There's obviously plenty of bad stuff it could do purely in the world of information technology and bits, but how do you disentangle those two sets of concerns?
Well, I think there is concerns of both, right? So in the 80s, there was a famous virus that went around called the Morris virus, and it essentially broke the early internet. It rendered it, basically unusable, and every node in every server had to like upgrade its do a new install, like hard reset. The internet has grown a lot since then, so that doesn't mean that there won't be sort of autonomous intelligent malware that is able to leap from computer to computer and can run locally and break a lot of systems, sort of Stuxnet times 1,000 type of scenarios. Those are real scenarios. There's risks from as training costs come down, that organizations that are now sort of uniquely able, because they have the resources to build a model that is able to fold proteins and synthesize new drugs and so forth, that the barrier to entry to doing something like that falls dramatically, and that people in their garage can develop the blueprints to synthesize a new pathogen. When we have systems like Cloud Labs, which Cloud Labs is sort of a cloud service for biolabs, where the AI could send those blueprints to the lab and have them printed out and sent back. Like, these things are actually not as far-fetched as they seem. Things do change a lot once they do enter the physical world, but that I think is going to happen sooner than people realize, because just like we're sort of seeing how these large models can do a lot in language and vision, we're starting to realize that actually they can do a lot in motor control and robotics as well. So I think in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see breakthroughs that are as astonishing as ChatGPT was for language in the realm of robotics, where the same sort of core architecture is going to move into robotic systems. And there's a forecasting platform called Materialism that where the current median forecast is that we'll have what they call strong AGI, AIs with robotic capabilities that would, in principle, this is the criterion, would in principle be able to assemble a Ferrari sight unseen with no specialized training, just being given the parts and some instructions. So if that pans out, we're going to have robots like that, in less than a decade. And people aren't quite factoring that in. They're seeing the existing models that we have and not understanding that we're on this curve, and this curve is turning up quickly.
John, why aren't you factoring that in?
I'm factoring all that in. I mean, I think that a huge percentage of people who theorize about AI, in many cases, never built companies, and in almost every case, have never built anything in the physical world. Right? You can tell by looking at their physiognomy. And so I do think that if you look at the world of building stuff, there's unbelievable amounts of tacit knowledge that are built into it that are basically impossible to predict. Are basically arts, right? They're arts, not sciences. It's going to be much harder to build a Ferrari than build a Ford, right? There's a reason why Ferraris are still hand built. They're not built today by machines or robots. They're built by hand. So I do think that a lot of these predictions of in the real world, as it were, are going to be a lot slower than people think or hope. However, one of the most insane things we did at the beginning of the information revolution was due to largely things like NEPA and environmental overregulation and activism, is we said you can't actually build anything in the world of bits or world of atoms, and you can do whatever you want in the world of bits, right? And this is the principal reason why our society is so insane today. And I definitely worry that AI is going to make this worse, right? My main concerns about AI are not technological; they're social and civilizational, right? What is it going to be like to live in a world where a computer will make for you whatever thing you desire, or whatever idea, whatever image, whatever anything that you desire? I don't think we are ready, and certainly we don't have the social and political institutions to grapple with that.
Yeah. So I think I was at a conference a couple of months ago when all of this first started really getting up and running, and I called you and we talked for like an hour and a half about this, and you had a line. I think you said it exactly like this, but maybe not, and I now say it like this, is that I'm not worried about AI becoming a god, I'm worried about people treating it like one. And embedded in that was concerns about how this could easily entrench the worst parts of the era we live in right now, in terms of a lack of vitality, a lack of thumos in the world, people deferring to the experts, quote unquote, whoever they might be. Walk me through some of those social civilizational concerns that you have about this technology, and play out the scenarios of what society will look like if we don't maybe nip some of those things in the bud.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, for starters, right, we already have, a proto-cult of people who essentially worship the idea of artificial general intelligence, right? Whether it's people like the fellow I'm blanking on his name at Google, who basically went insane because he believed that they had built a sentient AI, despite, he was just simply wrong about that on the technical level, but he truly believed it, and he was fired over going public with this, to the way that many of the people who are most concerned about existential risk talk about AI. It's clear, some of them have more or less said, we don't believe in God, but we're going to build one, right? AGI is going to be our God.
Rune won't stop tweeting about how he's going to birth a new God.
That's right. Yeah, this idea is, and think about it, right? We live in a civilization that since the Enlightenment has worshipped the idea of intelligence. And more intelligence is always better, more rationality is always better. And then you make a machine that's objectively vastly more intelligent, vastly more rational than any human. What could it be but a god if what you worship is intelligence? So I think the temptation to idolatry is off the charts. That's even before you get to being able to produce your own personalized AI model that you could treat as an oracle, right? You can provide all of your personal data, genetic data, information about your family, and then ask you difficult life decisions, right? And who knows about, you're creating the kind of omniscience that Christians associate with God. That's just off the top of my head.
But why is that wrong? Like, if it is
as a decision, as a way of making decisions, maybe it's not wrong. We can talk about that. But in terms of the way that our orientation toward it, look, humans have been making idols since we learned how to put sticks together, right? We put some sticks together, and we decided this little
how
stick
dare you
figure.
say this golden calf does
That's
not
right,
have
exactly.
deeply embedded meaning.
That's how dare you question my God, right? And now we have a technology. And if you look at the history of technology, whenever we've developed technologies that seem to have power outside of ourselves, the telegraph, radio, electricity, television, you can go back at these moments and find movements that found great supernatural meaning in what today we would see as literally the flickering of lights. And that was with technologies that couldn't speak to us. And so now we have a technology that speaks to us in surprising and intelligent ways. I think the temptation to idolatry is huge and the main thing to be avoided.
This is starting to touch on one, I think, core epistemic difference between how each of you are approaching this issue. And I'll put it to you guys to explain what that might be. Is that, Jon, you come from a very religious, specifically Christian approach to your political philosophy and civilizational outlook, and Sam, you do less so. How is that modulating the opinions that each of you have on these issues? We'll start with Sam.
Yeah, I'm not religious. I'm, in fact, a materialist atheist. And so, if you are someone like me who doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in a cosmic sort of morality written into the universe. So if you're not a moral realist, let's say, you forget religion, just moral realism as a position. You're much less confident that AI systems will just spontaneously converge to the right morality, quote unquote. I think our morality is objective in some sense, but is built up through culture and history, and radically contingent. And there's no particular reason to expect AI systems to align with it automatically. The other thing is, if you're a materialist, you're more open to the idea that all the brain is computation, and so there's nothing in principle stopping us from building brains that can do everything a human can 1,000 times faster, including having conscious experiences. And that's a pretty, that will be a real turning point in human history when we have the first conscious machines. And there are people already thinking about ways of testing that, right? By removing every mention of consciousness or sensory experience from the training data, and then seeing if we can ask the model, do you feel anything? That we will cross those points. And so, going to the point about idolatry, I tend to think that that AI, if it has any impact on religion, it will be a combination of, it'll make our culture more polytheistic and animistic at the same time, right? So polytheistic because the work of Joe Henrich, the evolutionary anthropologist, he's shown that monotheism really comes to being in line with the development of the early city-states. Judaism, one of the oldest monotheisms, gives basically works in parallel with the rise of the city-state. If AI is very fragmenting and our civilization sort of splits up, that's going to lead to a kind of blossoming of different kinds of gods. And then there's the animism part. I mean, the animism part is just kind of obvious, right? We're going to have toasters that talk to us, and there's one narrative that says Christianity kind of led the disenchantment of the world, that it pushed our concept of God into something, this abstract higher being, whereas in Japan the Shinto may see the forest as containing spirits and so forth. Well, in the West, Christianity has rid the forest of the spirits, and the forests are now just trees. I think AI will in some sense sort of lead to a re-enchantment, and in part it will be a kind of delusion, because while we may build systems that are sort of genuinely intelligent, genuinely have genuine cognition, we'll also have a lot of systems that sort of fool people, that seem like they're intelligent, that are simulacra of intelligence. And we're already seeing that in the context of human relationships, where people are spending, there's a website, character.ai, where you can have just sort of conversations with AI Elon Musk and stuff like that. They're averaging over 2 hours of on site time. So people visit that site and they have 2-hour conversations. There's people who are falling in love with their chatbots and substituting for like real human relationships. And that I think is concerning.
John?
I mean, a few years ago, well, several years ago, maybe it's five years ago, our friend James Poulos, started to make comments about catechizing the bots, or that, basically your theological
James Poulos.
Your theological background was the most important thing to understanding technology. And it was sort of like, James being a mystical rock star again. And now he's just been proven objectively the case, objectively right. I mean, I think my view on AI is deeply shaped by my faith more than any other kind of technology, because the first question you ask is, can it have a soul, or can it be like us, right? And a materialist has no good reason to say it can't be like us. And I'm a Christian. I believe in the Imago Dei. I believe that the soul of humans is something that's distinctive from not just things we make, but also the rest of the created order even. And so I also believe that, as Sam alluded to, that our mistake is that we project ourselves like narcissists everywhere we look. We anthropomorphize things. We project our consciousness. We project meaning into things.
If people treat their dogs like their children, why wouldn't they treat AI like a human?
Absolutely. And also, as something that we are making, we can make it more susceptible, more easily projected onto. And we're already starting to do that with things like these chatbot systems. Another level, though, I think that much of the despair or danger or fright that people have of AI is that since the Enlightenment, we've believed that humans were on the top of this sort of intelligence totem pole, right? Now we have something that might displace us. But as a Christian, especially someone rooted in the kind of more magisterial tradition, I've never felt that way, and I don't think the Christian religion teaches that, right? Not only is there God above us, but there's also a whole panoply of principalities and powers and angels and demons and other intelligences that Christian theology teaches are more intelligent than us. My friend Mike Askonas,
human value not coming exclusively through intelligence.
That's right, and rationality. That's right. Mike Askonas wrote a piece, "The Analog City and the Digital City," several years ago in the New Atlantis, where he questions whether we'll have a kind of recovery of the medieval view of mind. Medieval people were always walking around and they're always being harassed by annoying spirits and sprites and leprechauns, and I sort of think that's actually a pretty good modle for
the toaster that won't shut up in the morning is going to be the local leprechaun. Yeah. Okay,
you'll have to cast a warding spell or something.
Yeah, it's like Beauty and the Beast.
Learn the magic words that'll make the toaster
exactly. Yeah. How is learning the magic words that'll shut the toaster up any different from like saying a prayer to ward off an annoying demon?
This is a point Joshua Bach, the computer scientist, makes, is that he's also sort of a materialist like me, but he's open to using the language of spirit and spirituality, in the context of understanding that these are emergent properties of complex systems. But he argues that we should be striving to actually build systems that are in some ways sentient or conscious, because otherwise we'll just be building golems, and that may be an even more terrifying future, right?
Yeah, although I think that's a future where we're going to end up, and this is I think the last point. I'll be a little bit cryptic about this, but the Christian theologian Joseph Pieper points out that any philosophy of the future is implicitly a theology of the future, because if theology deals with the interpretation of sacred texts, then any philosophy of history takes a stand on whether one or several sacred text is right about what the future holds, right? And Christianity has prophecy about the future, and I think any person of faith reading those texts sees particular technologies as caught up into what Christians have understood as sort of the system of Antichrist. Mm-hmm. And you can also view that as a metaphor for a certain deeply inhuman way of inhabiting the world. And I see in AI both tremendous potential, but also in some of its potentials for centralization and totalitarian use. I see basically like the system of Antichrist.
Yeah, AI Leviathan.
AI Leviathan, that's right. Gives me the creeps.
So so far we've been primarily talking about the concerns that each of you have about AI, but relative to most of the public discourse, especially in the paper belt of the East Coast and politics and government and academia, you guys are technological optimists, relatively speaking. And so I'd like to go through a couple of the common concerns that exist about AI and hear you guys tell me